How many times do I have to ask you?
Rhey paced in front of a chair in a dark room.
Look, I can't use this knockoff time machine in my suit much longer.
Rhey turned his attention to the person he was interrogating.
Where are the Sentinel's prototypes?
I don't know who you are, but you're not getting them. Ayla growled back. Rhey stood in the Tempest house in front of Ayla tied to a chair. The house was trashed and searched through.
Andromedan Tech isn't gonna cut it.
Rhey pointed the remote at Ayla.
Do I have to use it again?
He threatened. Do your worst. Ayla snapped back.
Very well.
Rhey pressed down on the button. Ayla's screams were terrifying. Her memories swallowed her whole. Her sister killed, her niece killed, her father killed, her nephew missing. She lived alone for most of her recent life, and her thoughts consumed her. The remote strengthened her emotions tenfold, and Rhey was enjoying it.
Where are the time machines?
He demanded. I don't have them! Ayla screamed in agonizing pain.
You're lying!
Rhey snickered back. Kill me! Ayla screamed. Just kill me already! Rhey let go of the button.
What use would you be of me then?
I'm never any use. Ayla looked up through her wet, strained hair.
That's the spirit.
Rhey smiled. His blade extended from his sleeve and impaled Ayla through the chest. The blade retracted, and Ayla choked up a final breath, and her head fell limp. Rhey shook the blood from his sleeve and turned around. He thought to himself as he paced the room.
How much charge?
He checked a band around his sleeve.
Good enough.
He clenched his fist and vanished. So, have you figured out a way on how you're going to save the multiverse yet? Vax asked passively while sitting upside down on her couch, swinging her legs back and forth in the air, watching TV. Thought we said we weren't going to talk work while at home. The Sentinel smiled from the kitchen. Well, sure, but I mean, it's just the fate of the multiverse and all. Yeah, I know. The Sentinel teased. But seriously. Vax's tone shifted. Kinda want to keep this good streak going, you know? Do you have a plan? The Sentinel continued washing the dishes and thinking, choosing her words carefully in her head. Vax sat upright on the couch, turning to face the Sentinel. Huh? She wanted an answer. No. The Sentinel stated plainly, continuing her work. So what, are you giving up? Vax stared at the Sentinel, studying her expression to attempt and guess what she was thinking without her saying it. I don't think we're being told the full truth, the Sentinel answered. The emissaries aren't telling me everything. Number one, I can't save a universe where I don't know everything that's wrong with it, and number two, I think if the universe were really in that much danger, the emissaries would do something about it. Do you really think so? Vax asked. Yeah, the Sentinel lied. I do. Rhey appeared on a sandy planet. The ground was gritty and orange. His coattails flew in the wind as he admired the horizon.
Illuciferium 2.
He whispered to himself.
Time frame.
He checked a device around his wrist, making sure he had appeared in the right place.
The height of the Galactic War.
He admired his surroundings for a bit longer.
Pretty.
He chuckled. He walked over to a palace-like structure. The building was new, poorly constructed, and guarded heavily by guards and score lions. He approached the main entrance gate. Oppo. One of the guards held out his bird-like hand to stop Rhey from progressing any further. Rhey pressed down on a button on his remote, and the guard's pupils dilated. The guard opened the gate and welcomed Rhey in.
What a gentleman.
Rhey bowed as he entered. The other guard looked at the guard that let him in suspiciously. Why are you here? One of the guards stopped Rhey before he could ascend any stairs.
Here to see the big man in charge.
Rhey smiled.
He invited me.
Do you have any proof of that interaction? The guard asked. Rhey walked close to the guard, who nervously backed away. He held his hand to the guard's ear and whispered,
I can do what I want.
The guard gasped for air as Rhey's blade shot into his chest. Rhey continued up the stairs as his blade retracted.
Yo, lizard man!
Rhey called out. The menacing and slouched-over figure of a powerful Gar slowly turned around, hissing with a soft breath. Rogar's glowing yellow eyes met Rhey's. He squinted and raised one of his thick feathered eyebrows, questioning Rhey's presence.
Who are you?
Rogar asked.
So the boss hasn't told you, huh?
Rhey tossed his remote around.
What?
Rogar snaked back. He knew what Rhey was talking about, but he was surprised to hear anyone else mention the boss, almost afraid that someone else knew. He had a hunch of who Rhey was, having only heard mention of him before.
The boss has help from more than just you and me, but you're slacking. See, he can't take control over the Extraverse if you keep focusing on taking over the planets you want. Remember what he said, you'll get everything you want if you just help him out here. You have to make your focus either killing the Sentinel or capturing time. Pick your poison.
Rhey stared at the remote in his hand as he fiddled with it. Just holding it out seemed to make Rogar nervous.
You know, you're lucky to be in the position you're in. The boss wouldn't have sought you out had he not had any trust in that stupid prophecy of the Dragolupus, you know the one.
I'm certain I do.
Rogar nodded.
Well, with you being the chosen one, the hero of your own tale and all, the boss has no reason to want to let you go. How did that old prophecy go again? Along will come a mortal challenger with the combined power of a Dragolupus and a Gar, from outside of the Black Star's domain.
Rhey recited the beginning of the prophecy he mentioned in a sort of mocking way, speaking down on Rogar and moving the remote around like it were a prop and he were reciting a soliloquy in a stage play. Rogar spoke.
A guardian of their age constantly thwarted by the disciples of a powerful banished god. One of which, a power-hungry Gar, hailing from Iliosiferium seeking more. Although the Guardian will appear to defend their cause, along the way the Guardian will lose themselves to their cause and succumb to their true fate. The Gar that cheats death will fall on the winning side in the end.
Rogar finished the prophecy for Rhey, not liking his condescending tone.
Boy, if the Sentinel had ever graced his ears with that one.
Rhey held his hands to his hips and scoffed, looking down at his feet.
Especially in his 5th incarnation. Man, he's ripped entire realities to fit his image before. I swear he could break that prophecy in half with a snap of his fingers, and yet...
Rhey snapped his fingers and laughed to himself.
I'm from your future. I know what happens to you. You have to appease the boss. Focus on the task at hand. Forget your people.
But my people, I promised them land.
Rogar looked away, thinking to himself and weighing his options.
I already lost them their home planet.
The rest of the Gars are getting in the way of your success. You want land, but you can't get it if the Sentinel lives. I get that. Well, I want to watch the Sentinel suffer. I want the Sentinel to witness his world crumble and not be able to save it. You want that too, don't you?
Rhey stood up again and began pacing.
And the boss wants the extraverse so he can recreate the multiverse in his vision for us, his disciples. Think of all the land. Forget about land now and focus on ruling the extraverse later. Fulfill the prophecy. I'll kill the Sentinel.
Rhey thought for a second.
Again, and you'll be on the winning side. The boss's side.
The Sentinel is a nuisance.
Rogar agreed.
But I want land not for myself, but for my people. The boss does not promise me anything in the way of levity for the Gars.
Rogar eyeballed Rhey.
You aren't how the boss talked of you. I pictured something more...
More what, huh, Lizard Man? Look, like I said, I know how you turn out in the future. Don't go scrutinizing the boss's decisions.
I just thought what with Kranthar that he had a bit more... taste in his accomplices.
Original elitism as usual. What, in Siriv is alright then, huh? Offensive. Got nothing against Ilsians. Is it just because I'm a clone of your biggest fear?
How many know of the boss?
Rogar asked. He seemed to be shifting nervously, checking if any of his guards were overhearing the conversation.
No one survived knowing him. No one but us if you haven't let the word slip to Conchna, which, with what I know, I'm certain you haven't. Though Time and Celeste know, of course, how could they not? But Time's not willing to tell anyone. She has Celeste muzzled on a leash. I'll tell you what, this galactic warrior fighting sure does act as a good distraction for what's going on, but they'll find out eventually. But we cannot let the Sentinel know.
You said you know what happens to me?
Rogar asked.
You're diverting from the point. Will you, or will you not, do solely as the boss says?
I want to get rid of the Sentinel. That much is true, but I also promised land for my people. I will not let them down.
Rogar snaked his head back. Rhey held up his remote.
This little baby says otherwise.
Did you hear about the new armor Soligar's been working on? A guard asked another guard outside the entrance. Hasn't he been working on that since last Trentlow? He'll never get it figured out. I don't know, maybe... The guard's passive conversation was swiftly interrupted by a plasmatic explosion of purple at the entrance gate. Rogar burst from his temple, breathing plasma in massive plumes. His pupils were stretched thin and his eyes were stained red. He didn't look like himself. One of the injured guards began a natural phasing process that was cut short by Rogar slamming his tail into the guard's spine. A few score lines fought against Rogar, trying to protect the palace, but were easily crushed by crystal pillars of plasma shooting from the ground. Rogar roared into the sky and turned his attention to the other guards who were reluctant to fight their leader. A guard shapeshifted into a small bird and tried to flee, but Rogar quickly snapped his jaws and swallowed the Gar whole. Rogar went on his rampage, tearing through his personal army of the last surviving Gars. A few Gars managed to escape, but the majority of his kind were slaughtered. Rhey stumbled from the destroyed entrance and watched as Rogar cannibalized his troops. He looked down at his remote and laughed.
Yes!
Rogar turned his attention to Rhey and smiled a grisly smile, showing his black-bloodied teeth.
Oh.
Rhey held up his remote and pressed down on a button. Rogar clenched his fist, and the remote exploded.
Huh.
Rogar roared in the direction of Rhey and charged at him. Rhey teleported away, dodging the blow as Rogar hit the palace. Rhey glanced down at the band around his wrist. It was blinking red.
Not good.
Rogar turned around and growled, pushing flames from his nose as he shook his head in anger. His eyes were stained red with hatred. The Gars around him were slain and lying in their own blood, and Rhey was standing in the midst of it all. He held his hands out and stepped away.
Calm down, bud. It's over now. They're gone.
Rogar shook his head and his eyes returned to normal. He looked around at the bodies with a confused look on his face.
Huh?
Huh.
Rhey looked around.
Well, would you look at that? All of your people are dead.
I did this?
Rogar looked at his hands.
You sure did.
Rhey smiled.
You know what that means. Without these goons in your way, you've gone full bad guy. Now you can focus on helping the boss man, make things easier for Sirav and me.
Rogar turned his attention to Rhey.
Go get him, Tiger.
Rhey nodded.
You're a monster.
Rogar grimaced.
Aw, thank you.
Rhey smiled, doing a sort of curtsy.
Means a lot coming from you, really.
Rogar shook his head in anger and flew away to his destroyed temple. Once in, a sound of a portal opening and closing signified Rogar's departure. Rhey walked into the destroyed palace and dug through the remains until he came across one of Rogar's portal creators. He picked it up and walked into the middle of the destruction, watching over the horizon. His coattails blew in the wind as he stood, scanning the destruction, admiring the flayed carcasses of the guards and appreciating a job well done.
Pretty,
he remarked. Ahead of him, two figures flashed into view. The fifth sentinel stood amidst explosion craters from Rogar's rampage, surrounded by Rogar's burning flames scarring the landscape. Gar corpses and the remnants of Rogar's Rhey-induced rampage littered the vast expanse. The fifth sentinel picked up Rhey's broken remote. He stared off in the distance and unknowingly locked eyes with Rhey. Rhey set down the portal and walked through, leaving Elysium 2. Intent on visiting his colleague to assist with repairs to his calcarous armoring and his remote, Rhey wanted to assure full functionality for his next victim. He stepped through the portal and appeared in a dark room. Rhey looked up and saw lava flowing over a thick glass pane in the ceiling. The underground room was overly warm and uncomfortable. Rhey looked around and waited, wanting to get on with his plan.
Hurry it up,
he called out. Sorry I don't have working legs? A voice teased. A small yellow Ilsean, like Ganto, crawled his way from a hallway into the main room. He was missing a few of his arms and one of his legs. His bluish-green antlers were broken. What do you want?
I need a new remote. And my armor. Teleporter, too.
Rhey explained to the injured Ilsean. I'm not your slave, Rhey. The Ilsean hopped up onto a table full of scraps and started sifting through them.
Boss says otherwise, Sirav.
Rhey approached the table. With all these demands, it'll be far off before I can finish my armor. Sirav explained.
Why do I care?
Rhey asked.
Plus, I got you the calcarous for that. You should be thanking me.
Fair enough. Sirav snatched the portal sphere from Rhey and examined it. He eventually fixed Rhey's teleporter and armor as well, and when he was done, Rhey flashed away. Sentinel? Vax called for the Sentinel's attention. She was watching the news closely. The Sentinel turned her head around the corner from the hallway. What is it? She asked. Vax turned up the volume and let the news play. Breaking news. Terrors have been spotted attacking several cities around Sector 7 on Janistar. What? Why would Hive 2 do that? The Sentinel asked. She approached the TV and watched closer. The Sentinel was about to say something, with an angry look on her face, but the doorbell rang to interrupt her. She and Vax shared a concerned look. Vax's hands flared with plasma, and the two of them walked slowly to the door. The Sentinel swung it open, and Vax's hands flared brighter. Ah, geez, guys, it's me. Miser held his arms up in front of his face. Vax's flames vanished, and the Sentinel stepped back. Miser, why are you here? Did you guys see the news? Miser lowered his arms. You could have called. Vax held her hand to her head. We have to do something about it, and I don't have a teleporter, Miser explained. Do we know where Hive 2 is? The Sentinel looked to Miser for answers. Yeah, Ilsos is hiding out on one of their moons, Sanzi. Miser held out his hand. Let's go. Are you armed? The Sentinel asked. I don't want to bring you if you aren't prepared. I am, Miser assured the Sentinel. The Sentinel grabbed Miser's arm and pulled Vax in close to her. The three of them flashed away and appeared on the surface of Sanzi. The ground was hard, wet, and a grayish blue. The Sentinel kneeled and felt the ground, noticing that the wetness was fresh, warm, and flowing. She held up her hand and examined the transparent liquid. This is blood, the Sentinel deduced. Of? Vax stared at the Sentinel's hands. Miser walked forward to a hill, following the mostly transparent trail of liquid. Vax and the Sentinel followed and came to a stop where they heard a piercing screech ring through the air, the screams of terrors. They had just rounded the hill when they came upon a massive corpse. Like a giant armored centipede, the body lay half in and half out of the ground. Its flat exoskeletal faceplate was chipped and cracked against a large rock. Its jaw was unhinged and loose, hanging limply on the ground with transparent blood spilling from its mouth. Its 5 eyes were lifeless and blank, and the creature's many arms, like exoskeletal ribs, were twitching. It had just died. That's Hive 2's hive mind, the Sentinel pointed out. It's dead. Vax stared at it. Thousands of terrors flew around the corpse, screaming and flailing their tentacles. They seemed to be flying in random directions. What are they doing? Miser watched the terrors scramble. Without a hive mind, I guess they're doing all they know how. The Sentinel watched as terrors electrocuted each other to death, and one of the terrors spotted the Sentinel. The Sentinel looked at Vax. Come on, Vax. Vax focused her hands and blasted an electric shock to the terror, killing it. What do we do now? Do we just leave? We know it's dead. Miser seemed uncomfortable. We need to figure out the cause of death. The Sentinel stepped forward and was stopped in her tracks by a portal opening. She stared through the portal, looking out into the streets of Janistar. She stumbled back in fear as Rhey stepped through the portal. The portal closed, and the small sphere flew into his hand. He caught it and tossed it in the air, catching it again. Rhey smiled at the Sentinel, Vax, and Miser.
Nice seeing you again.
He smiled.
I'll save you the trouble of figuring out what killed the hive, and I'll just tell you straight up it killed itself.
Rhey tossed the portal machine again and caught it. How would you know that? Miser asked. Vax. The Sentinel nodded at her. Vax flared her fists.
Because it's my favorite way of killing. Making others do all the work themselves.
Rhey held up the remote, different from his last. It looked more robust, and the red button was replaced with a dial. Rhey put away the portal machine and instead tossed his remote around. Vax! The Sentinel called for a signal, holding up her hand. Vax lifted her hands, and plasma roots snaked their way up Rhey's legs, trapping him in the ground. They continued to slither up Rhey's body, stopping all his movements. Rhey struggled to break free, chuckling through his restraint. Vax charged a flaming ball of plasma in her hands, but it quickly faded as she fell to her knees. Rhey struggled, but he was able to turn the dial on the remote. The Sentinel ran to Vax's aid, but fell to her knees as well. Miser reached for a pistol at his side, but fell to his knees under the influence of the remote. No! Vax held her head and closed her eyes. Everything in her mind grew dark, except for a singular image of the Sentinel, lying on the floor, dead. She screamed, but nothing escaped her mouth. She shook her head and opened her eyes. Rhey had escaped his restraints, and the Sentinel and Miser were distracted. Rhey jumped forward and grabbed Vax. A blade extended from his sleeve, and he held it against Vax's throat. Sentinel! Vax screamed. Before the Sentinel could do anything, Rhey flashed away with Vax in his grips. They appeared on a balcony, an all too familiar balcony. High up in a skyscraper in the dead of night, at the center of a booming old York City, Canada Prime. Rhey had brought Vax back to her apartment, a place she never thought she'd be again, a place she never hoped to be again. Rhey turned Vax's head forcefully to look through a window. Through the window, Vax could see her young self sleeping in her bed. It was surreal. It felt like she shouldn't be there, looking at the 15-year-old version of her first incarnation. She heard screams, and darted her eyes to the balcony doors, looking into her room. Rhey turned her head to face the action, and Vax's heart skipped a beat when she saw what was happening. It suddenly made sense to her, and she hated that it did. She opened her mouth to scream, but Rhey held his hand over her mouth. His blade angled close to Vax's cheek. She was forced to watch as Rhey, presumably from another time before this, slaughtered her parents in their own home, mere feet from her sleeping younger self, stabbing each of them in the chest more than once with a short blade. Vax's muffled attempts at screaming and shaking her body did nothing to help. Rhey shushed Vax. He sliced his blade ever so slightly, cutting Vax's cheek. She winced in pain, still trying to scream and break free to save her parents, but Rhey held her close and tighter. The more she tried to break free, the more Rhey moved closer to the balcony's edge. Vax watched in horror as the past Rhey caressed the side of her dying father's face. Pourquoi? Her father could barely speak, his wife crying beside him.
Oh.
The past Rhey's screen shifted his smile into a quasi-frown. He feigned sounding sad.
Désolé, mon ami.
He shoved his blade into Vax's father's chest, killing him. Vax's mother opened her mouth to scream, but her breath was cut short by Rhey's blade. Rhey stood up and wiped his hands together like he'd accomplished a job well done, and turned his face to his future self, and Vax held in his grasp.
You wish this was a vision.
He smiled.
Try to wake up, hon. This isn't a dream.
Vax tried to scream, hatred burning in her heart. She tried to break free again, but Rhey, holding her hostage, cut at her cheek again, getting right at her cheekbone and cutting right under her eye. The Paradox Master appeared in the room. Vax mumbled from behind Rhey's hand, trying to catch the Paradox Master's attention. This Paradox Master seemed younger, not one that knew her now, or Rhey even. Rhey's screen turned off, as to not let light draw attention to himself. His hand pressed harder against Vax's face. The Paradox Master knelt down and held his hands, one of each, on her parents' foreheads. I'm so sorry, he whispered to them. He extracted plasma from them, turning it around in his hands until he combined both of them into a single revstone. Before he stood up, he pushed his fingers over their eyelids, closing them shut. He stood up and wandered over to Vax's room. Vax's eyes followed the Paradox Master. Save them, she thought, pleading with him in her mind. She watched as he infused a revstone into the young, sleeping Vax. Vax looked down at her hands as if she had just remembered her own ability. Her hands glowed with plasma. Rhey chanted in an irritating, sing-songy voice.
I killed your parents.
His screen turned back on, his grin wide. Die! Vax's hands flared brightly, sparking with electricity as she pushed Rhey off the balcony. She shrieked. Rhey outstretched his hand and grabbed Vax. Vax leaned over the edge of the balcony, Rhey dangling from her arm, holding on with a tight grip. Let go of me! Vax screamed. She was hoping to get the attention of the Paradox Master, but he had already left. She heard her younger self scream in terror as she saw her parents' bodies lying on the floor. Rhey was pulling Vax off the balcony, her body only secured by her feet, which were locked under the bottom of the glass railing. They were sliding as Rhey pulled at her. She turned her head to see her younger self crying at her parents' side, and her heart shattered. Her stomach dropped, and the sweat streaming down her face seemed to outdrip the blood dripping from her cuts. The box flashed by her side, nudging into her shoulder and teleporting her and Rhey back to Sanzi. Rhey fell to the ground as Vax stumbled back. The box made its way back to the Sentinel as she jumped at Rhey. The Sentinel grabbed Rhey around the neck, choking him as dark plasma swirled around him. Sentinel, stop! Vax cried, barely managing to cough up the words. The dark plasma faded as the Sentinel turned around. Rhey was released from the Sentinel's grasp just long enough for him to reach for his portal. He rolled away from the Sentinel and the portal opened on the ground and he jumped through, just as it closed. Miser gasped for air and stood up. What did he do to you? The Sentinel hugged Vax and pulled her fingers through her hair as calmingly as she could. Vax cried into the Sentinel's shoulder. He killed them. It was him. He killed my parents. Vax cried. She pushed away from the Sentinel and looked into her eyes. The Sentinel saw the cuts on Vax's face, and her eyes widened. She let go of Vax and approached Miser. Miser tried to catch his breath as he stood. He looked down at his hands. They were gone. He stared ahead, wide-eyed. We need to stop him. Miser, memory, unwanted, now. The Sentinel demanded. The vision Rhey just gave me, please. Miser answered. The Sentinel held her fingers to Miser's forehead as black plasma swirled at her fingertips. Sentinel, no, don't do this. Vax stepped forward. You'll use up your plasma and die, please. She approached her and grabbed her shoulder, turning her body to face her. By the time the Sentinel turned around, she already had a small rev stone in her hand. She held the stone to Vax's cuts, not saying a word. Sentinel, please. Vax shook her head. The Sentinel closed her eyes as Vax's lower cut began to seal, plasma trailing between the stone and the wound. Pain shot up the Sentinel's arm, just as if an identical cut had opened up across her arm, widening and stinging. Stop, please stop! Vax grabbed the Sentinel's arm, causing her to flinch, but she kept healing Vax's wound. Vax pushed the arm away. Sentinel! She yelled. Stop! They stared back at each other. The cut under Vax's eye remained, half sealed like a scar. Don't do that. Trying to help, the Sentinel protested. And it's killing you, Vax said. She stepped forward, placing her hand on the Sentinel's shoulders, pulling her closer. Thank you. She kissed her on the forehead. But please stop using your powers. The Sentinel nodded. Vax closed her eyes and hugged the Sentinel, holding her close, crying into her shoulder. The Sentinel locked eyes with Miser. This needs to end, Miser said. The Sentinel nodded in agreement.